Final Fantasy VII Rebirth features a combat system that builds upon the foundations established in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. This means that those familiar will feel right at home, but no matter whether you're an experienced veteran or are coming in fresh with Rebirth, there are plenty of subtle nuances designed to help keep things interesting, and it's those subtle nuances that we'll be running through in this video, while also talking through some other broader combat tips that can help you to take advantage of everything Rebirth offers, all with the ultimate goal of making your progress through the game as quick and seamless as possible. First though, it's time to talk through the basics of combat, as even though the core functionality is the same as Rebirth, modifications have been made to some of the core characters. For example, while square is still used to perform standard melee attacks and triangle is used to perform character-specific abilities without spending ATB, the implementation does vary per character. This was, of course, present within the original game, but some characters now have extra elements. For example, even though Barrett has stayed near identical between the games, with the player simply required to hold down the square button to fire his gun, other characters, such as Cloud and Aerith, will now perform different actions when the standard attack button is held down. In the case of Cloud, this will see him perform a sweeping attack while in operator mode that hoists smaller enemies into the air and also groups them together. When in Punisher mode, Cloud will instead perform a brutal downward piercing strike that grants him the Berserk buff. Cloud has also been given a magical ranged attack to offer more utility against flying enemies that would often be out of reach, and this can be initiated by evading and then performing standard strikes. Defending is also quite similar, but there are again some tricks that have been added. In the initial sense though, every character has the ability to perform an evade through the use of the circle button, and they can also block using R1. Blocking will reduce the damage, while evading will see characters avoid damage entirely. The caveat here though is that each character evades in a slightly different way due to their baseline mobility. It means that characters like Cloud and Red 13 will be much more effective at avoiding attacks through general movement, but they can also cover more ground when using their evasive move. One of the more intriguing nuances here is that some characters can also strike the enemy while evading close to them. Cloud is one such character, and he will cheekily stick out his sword for a low damage strike should he be close enough when evading. But that then brings us to the more specific tips, and the first relates to parrying. In the original game, characters only had those three choices to avoid or reduce damage: evading through general movement or the purpose-built evasion button, or blocking. But in episode Intermission, a fourth option was added: parrying. The original game featured a parry materia, but it didn't quite function in the expected way. Instead, it just performed a similar function to an evade, just with an offensive quality attached. In episode Intermission, Yuffie came with a true parry mechanic, which saw her able to nullify damage if blocking at the right timing point. This mechanic has now been pushed through to the entire cast, meaning that every character can nullify incoming damage if they block with the right timing point. And beyond that, because this now functions more as a true parry, parried enemies are now placed off balance for a short period of time, increasing their stagger gauge and making them vulnerable to attacks. The usefulness of the parrying mechanic can then be doubled up with the usefulness of Cloud's Punisher mode. In Remake, Punisher mode was very powerful, as alongside allowing Cloud to deal increased damage at a faster rate, something that could be further enhanced by being granted the Berserk buff, it also allowed Cloud to deliver a powerful counterattack when struck with basic melee strikes or most melee-based blockable abilities. Cloud would still take damage, but the exchange was a favourable one, due to not just the damage Cloud would deal, but also its ability to build stagger and grant a significant portion of ATB. In Rebirth, this basic functionality of Punisher mode is retained, but if blocked at the correct timing point, Cloud can also parry and avoids taking any damage while still receiving the same benefits. And this makes Punisher mode a very valuable asset for anyone who has Cloud as one of their favoured characters. That then brings us onto another subtle adjustment that makes a huge difference, and this relates to aerial combat. There was a notion of aerial combat that existed within Remake, but it was often frustrating to fight against aerial enemies without having either Aerith or Barrett around, as the only way for characters like Cloud and Tifa to hurt those enemies was often through brute force luck or relying on materia. That has now changed thanks to revised combat mechanics. For Cloud, this means that you can dovetail with the new ranged combat that initiates when performing an evasion. After evading, if the standard attack button is held down, Cloud will launch himself towards the targeted enemy, and this happens even if they're in the air. Once airborne, Cloud can then continue to attack, or remain airborne either by using an ability such as triple slash or by simply evading continuously. Tifa also now has much more mobility, but it doesn't quite manifest in the same way. Unlike Cloud, Tifa doesn't have a ranged melee attack. Instead, she needs to be hoisted up into the air by another character, and this is made possible by specific synergy skills. That then brings us onto perhaps the most important new mechanic, synergy. This has two specific arms, skills and abilities, and they each need to be learnt via the folio system. Skills can be used at any time. All the controlled character needs to do is block, and a new command menu appears that contains 2 offensive synergy skills and 2 defensive ones. These have numerous functions, with some extending combinations and others needing to be held down for maximum performance. When used in the correct manner, however, and with the correct timing, they can be very useful. Abilities, on the other hand, are a bit more complicated, and there needs to be a degree of preparation and planning to ensure that they're used in the optimum manner. The use of synergy abilities is then tied to ATB actions. Whenever a character uses an ATB bar to perform an action, whether it's using an ability, casting a spell, or using an item, they gain a synergy pip. Each synergy ability then requires that 2 characters both independently have an appropriate amount of synergy pips before they can perform the designated ability. What they then do depends on the type of synergy ability selected. Some will deal damage while also granting some kind of buff, while others just grant a buff. It's important, however, to ensure that they're saved for the right moment. One buff, for example, extends the stagger window, so it's perfect for maximizing damage during that time. The introduction of synergy then places much more emphasis on cycling through characters. This was important when playing through Remake, as by taking direct control of characters, they would deal more damage long term as they would gain ATB faster. However, cycling through characters was a nice to have strategy as opposed to being essential to success. It could still be argued that that's similar within Rebirth, but the introduction of synergy abilities makes cycling through characters a much more beneficial course of action. And this is true for the reasons just mentioned, but also because without making use of the appropriate synergy abilities, it's impossible to gain access to some of the strongest character-specific abilities and limit breaks. The other element worth mentioning here is that outside of combat, Rebirth has also introduced a party switcher. This allows you to configure 3 different party setups, and by using the party switcher, you can change between these configurations on the fly whenever you're walking around in the field. And that's a nice tee up for materia, as earlier in the game materia slots will be sparse and you'll need to split them across all your characters. This is similar to the original Final Fantasy VII and Remake, and it should be said that materia still remains fundamental to success in Rebirth. But perhaps some of the most interesting and useful materia is not the standard spells like fire, ice and lightning. Instead, earlier in the game there's some of the command materia. In this regard, one of the most useful is actually Assess. It's not the most sexy of materia as it doesn't deal any damage, but what it does allow players to do is learn. And as you navigate your way through the various regions and fight countless enemies and bosses, learning their weaknesses and what specific courses of action can lead to them becoming pressured is incredibly valuable. The main reason this is so valuable is that pressured enemies can be staggered much faster, and this means fights will end up being much shorter. Another command materia that might seem odd to prioritize is enemy skill, especially because it has an intimate relationship with Assess. After a certain number of enemies in each region have been assessed, Chadley will open up a new combat VR simulator scenario, and by completing these, the enemy's skill materia will gain access to new abilities. Plasma Discharge, for example, deals lightning damage, but beyond that, it also gains a huge electricity spike whenever the user gains an ATB bar, and they can then gain additional ATB depending on how much damage this electricity spike deals. As the enemy's skill materia levels up, it can also provide some serious buffs to the character that has it equipped. That then brings us onto our last major tip, the minimap. Now, unlike our previous tips, this one doesn't relate to combat, but that doesn't make it any less valuable in the grand scheme of things. With Rebirth being now such a large game, it can sometimes be difficult to navigate your way around the field. By default, the game has a tracker show up at the top of the screen, and this highlights nearby interactables and the general direction of specific waypoints. However, if you prefer to see a minimap instead, you can turn this on via the options menu. Within the gameplay section, you'll see an option for world navigation display. By default, it's set to tracker, but you can then change this to minimap. The minimap will then appear at the top right of the screen, and how it performs can also be tweaked. Again, by default, it's set to dynamically change based on your camera rotation, but you can also modify it to remain static. As you walk around, smaller objects will then pop up if they're within 20 meters of the party's location, and their distance will also be displayed. And that can then make exploration and discovery just a little bit easier depending on your preference. Either way, we hope all of these tips will help to elevate your game as you navigate your way through Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But if you have any more you find along the way, be sure to share them in the comments below so that other would-be travelers may stumble upon them and benefit from your sage wisdom. Also, if you found this video useful, please do feel free to like it and share it around, and make sure you subscribe, as in the coming days and weeks, we will be sharing character-specific combat guides. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, Gregory, Justin Dent, and Sukun TDK, your super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.